cosmetics company's launch party was in full swing. Golden lights reflected off champagne flutes as the orchestra played softly in the background. The luxury hotel's main ballroom had been transformed into a visual spectacle. Arrangements of white and red flowers adorned each table, illuminated panels displayed the new products, and immaculately uniformed waiters circulated, offering elaborate canapés and refined drinks. Sarah, a woman of classic beauty, expressive eyes, and perfectly coiffed dark hair in an elegant chignon, moved among the guests with the confidence of someone who built an empire with her own hands. Her red dress contrasted against her fair skin, and the genuine smile she offered to each important client revealed her pride for the new product she had just launched, a revolutionary line of cosmetics that promised to combine natural ingredients with advanced technology. Distracted by so many greetings and explanations about her new product line, she didn't notice the tall, elegant man walking toward her until their bodies collided in an accidental encounter that would change the course of 2 lives forever. "Pardon me, what a disaster," Sarah exclaimed in embarrassment, seeing the champagne dripping down the stranger's impeccable suit, creating a dark stain on the fabric that seemed to cost more than many could imagine. "Perhaps it's a sign from destiny that we should get to know each other better," the man replied, with a seductive smile that lit up his dark eyes in an almost hypnotic way. The orchestra transitioned to a more romantic melody. At the moment Sarah felt her cheeks flush. The stranger had a presence that dominated the surrounding environment, tall, broad-shouldered, a posture that indicated absolute confidence. There was something magnetic about that man. Richard, as he introduced himself seconds later in a deep voice that seemed to envelop Sarah like an intimate embrace. His slightly graying hair at the temples lent him an air of sophisticated maturity, while his elegant gestures and rich, melodious voice created an irresistible aura of mystery. His hands, when they took hers in a formal greeting, were firm and warm. Sarah, always so controlled and rational in her business affairs, built year after year with iron determination after her husband's untimely death, felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, that fluttering sensation in the stomach, her heart racing when their fingers touched exchanging cards, a tingling in her skin that remained even after the physical contact ceased. His scent, woody with citrus notes, lingered in her memory even after they parted ways, with the promise of coffee the following morning. She didn't know it yet, but that seemingly casual encounter would change her life forever, setting in motion events that would test her strength, her love, and her resilience. "I have to confess, Sarah, that spilling champagne on handsome men isn't a networking technique I'm familiar with, but it seems effective by the way he was looking at you," her assistant joked as she approached, adjusting her thin-framed glasses while watching Richard walk away. "It may sound crazy, but I felt something different with him. As if we had known each other in another life. As if this moment was destined somehow," Sarah replied, her eyes still fixed in the direction Richard had gone, ignoring the crowd of important guests awaiting to congratulate her on the event's success. 3 days later, they dined by candlelight in an exclusive restaurant. The setting was perfect for a romantic date, well-spaced tables ensuring privacy, subtle lighting that softened expressions, live music performed by a string quartet in a discreet corner. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held the glass of red wine, while Richard recounted stories about his international investments, his years studying abroad, and how impressed he was with the history of Sarah's company, built from scratch after she became a young widow. He seemed to know exactly what to say, how to say it, when to smile, when to show seriousness. With each move, Sarah felt more enchanted, as if under the effect of an irresistible spell. Every word he uttered was measured, every gesture calculated to create an impression of absolute sincerity. With each encounter, Richard proved more charming. He sent flowers to her office, remembered details about her preferences, the coffee she drank in the morning, the author she was reading, the wine she preferred on cold nights, showed genuine interest in her business expansion plans, offered advice that always seemed to consider her and her son's well-being first. Sarah, who had decided to focus solely on raising her son and growing her business after her husband's death, avoiding relationships that could divert her attention from these 2 pillars of her life, saw her defenses crumbling little by little before this man who seemed to understand her so perfectly, as if he could read her soul. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Sarah. A woman like you is rare, intelligent, determined, and with an immense heart. The business world rarely produces people who keep their humanity intact," Richard would say, while gently kissing her hands during one of their many romantic encounters, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that seemed to penetrate to the depths of her being. "I'm afraid, Richard, afraid that I'm dreaming and one day I'll wake up. I had built so many barriers around myself over these years, focused so much on being strong for my son and my business, that I forgot what it feels like to be vulnerable, what it's like to trust someone other than myself," she confessed, letting slip a vulnerability she rarely showed anyone, as the candlelight danced across their close faces. The weeks went by in a whirlwind of emotions: sunset boat rides, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, as Richard enveloped Sarah in his strong arms and whispered promises in her ear. Sophisticated dinners at restaurants where he seemed to know every chef and owner. Phone calls that lasted for hours when they were separated by business trips, each of his words carefully chosen to make her feel loved and desired, even from afar. Sarah felt alive again, desired, complete, as if a part of her that had been asleep for years was finally awakening under the touch and words of this man who had come from nowhere and quickly became the center of her world. When she was with him, the world seemed brighter, the colors more vibrant, the flavors richer. Friends commented on how rejuvenated she looked, how her eyes had regained a sparkle they hadn't had in a long time. Sarah, always so cautious, let herself be swept away by the current of this new love, with the abandon of someone who has finally found a safe harbor after years adrift. The only obstacle in the perfect romance was Ethan, Sarah's preteen son. With eyes identical to his mother's and an ever-suspicious expression, the boy watched Richard with evident reservation. From the very first moment, there seemed to be an invisible barrier between them, an instinctive resistance that not even all of Richard's charm could penetrate. The first time Sarah introduced them, in the living room of her imposing architectural mansion, with its high ceilings, large windows, and elegant furniture that reflected the owner's refined taste, Ethan barely extended his hand to greet the stranger who made his mother smile like a teenager. His eyes, usually as warm as his mother's, were cold and evaluative, examining the man as if searching for evidence of something hidden beneath the charming surface. "Pleased to meet you, Ethan. Your mother speaks highly of you. She says you're a brilliant boy, perhaps the smartest in your class," said Richard, offering a gift, the latest video game on the market, not yet available in stores, wrapped in silver paper with an elaborate blue ribbon. The boy thanked him coldly, his eyes assessing every move of the man who seemed determined to carve out a space in their lives. As Sarah watched hopefully, Ethan opened the present with calculated movements, thanked again with polite but emotionless words, and asked to be excused to put the object in his room, a transparent excuse to escape the visitor's presence. "No one will replace my father," Ethan declared during a dinner a few weeks later, after Richard suggested that the three of them travel together on the next vacation to a paradise island where he knew the owner of an exclusive resort. "Your father will always be your father, Ethan. I never intended to take his place. I would only like us to be friends, to be part of this wonderful family your mother has built," Richard replied with a patience that impressed Sarah, his tone gentle and understanding, with no sign of irritation at the boy's evident hostility. Sarah, torn between newly discovered happiness and her son's discomfort, tried to build bridges between the two. She organized programs for the three of them, movie sessions with Ethan's favorite films, trips to technology fairs that interested the boy, soccer games where Richard strived to demonstrate enthusiasm, even though he was clearly not a fan of the sport. She insisted that Ethan give Richard a chance, tried to explain to her son how important this new chance at happiness was for her, without realizing that with each new attempt, the son retreated further into his protective silence. The boy's intuition, still uncontaminated by adult complications and justifications, seemed to alert him to something that Sarah, in her fog of passion, was unable to perceive. During the nights, Ethan watched through his bedroom window as Richard and his mother conversed in the garden, noticing how the man's smile seemed different when Sarah turned around, less warm, more calculating. He perceived the quick glances at the luxury watch when he thought no one was watching during Sunday lunches. He noticed the disguised irritation when his mother had to cancel a program to attend an emergency at the company. Small details that added together formed a disturbing picture that the boy still didn't know how to fully interpret, but which left a bitter taste and a constant alert in his young but perceptive mind. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye. The relationship evolved with the speed and intensity typical of mature passions, those that occur when two people already know themselves, or believe they do, and know what they want, or think they know. Soon, Richard's clothes began to occupy space in Sarah's immense closet, his shirts precisely aligned next to her elegant dresses, his Italian shoes paired with the designer heels she wore to important events. Your toothbrush appeared in the main bathroom, your shaving products meticulously organized near her facial creams, your books on economics and the financial market on the bedside tables, mixed with the biographies and novels she preferred. Despite Ethan's reservations, now expressed mainly in prolonged silences and suspicious glances, whenever Richard entered a room, Sarah decided the man should definitively live with them. "It will be good for everyone, son. A complete family again," she told Ethan one night, unaware of how her eyes took on a different glow when speaking of her new companion, how her voice changed to an almost reverent tone when pronouncing his name, how her own opinions seemed increasingly aligned with Richard's on every matter, from managing the company to raising her son. "I never imagined I would find someone like you at this stage of life, that it would be possible to feel this fullness again. It's as if you filled a space I didn't even know was empty," Sarah whispered one night, nestled in Richard's arms as the moon cast soft shadows through the partially open curtains. "We're just beginning our story, my love. I have great plans for us, for our future together. Trust me, I'll take care of you and everything that's important to you," he replied, kissing her forehead with what seemed to be genuine adoration, his eyes revealing for a fleeting instant something Sarah missed, a calculating glint, a flash of satisfaction that had nothing to do with love but with conquest. The businessman integrated into the mansion's routine with an impressive naturalness, getting to know every detail of the house better than the employees who had worked there for years, becoming interested in the company's operations to the point of starting to offer suggestions about investments and restructurings, winning over the employees with his calculated generosity that manifested itself in expensive gifts on special dates and strategic praise that made everyone feel valued. For Sarah, it was as if he had always been a part of their lives, as if the period before Richard had merely been preparation for his arrival. The weekends were filled with carefully planned outings by him, the dinners with lively conversations about plans for the future, where Richard subtly assumed the role of chief strategist, and the nights. The nights belonged to the two of them, in a rediscovery of pleasures that Sarah had forgotten existed, moments of intimacy where she gave herself completely, without reservation, without barriers, without realizing that, with each new dawn, her independence and her discernment diminished a little more. What Sarah didn't perceive, in her mist of newly discovered happiness, were the small signs accumulating like dark clouds on the horizon before a devastating storm. Richard's excessive interest in the company's financial details, always asking about profit margins, capital structure, major investors. The seemingly casual questions about passwords and accesses. "Dear, what was that safe code again where you keep the important documents?" Or, "For security, perhaps I should also have access to the main system in case something happens to you." The calls he would always take in another room, quickly moving away when the phone rang with certain specific numbers, lowering his voice when she approached, abruptly ending conversations with a "we'll talk later" when she entered the office. Small details that should have raised red flags, but were easily explained and justified by the veil of trust and love that now covered Sarah's normally perceptive eyes. "Mom, did you notice that he always asks about the company? About money? About important contracts? Don't you find it strange?" Ethan ventured one night, as Sarah tucked him into sleep as she had done since he was little, a ritual they maintained despite the boy being on the cusp of adolescence. "Ethan, he's interested because he cares about me, about us. Richard has experience in international business. He wants to help expand our company, create an even greater legacy for you in the future. Please, give him a chance. For me." "It's so important to me to see the two people I love most in the world getting along," she pleaded, kissing her son's forehead without seeing the genuine concern in those eyes so similar to her own, eyes that had inherited her intelligence but not her current emotional blindness. Ethan, on the other hand, with the sharp intuition of children, that uncorrupted perception by adult rationalizations and desires that often cloud judgment, felt that something wasn't right. He saw how Richard's smile disappeared like a removed mask when his mother left the room. He noticed how he would examine company documents when he thought no one was watching, discreetly photographing pages with his cell phone. He perceived the falsity in every affectionate gesture directed at him, the strokes on his head that seemed more mechanical than affectionate, the expensive gifts that came without the warmth of a true interest in his tastes, the questions about his school that never delved into his true passions and interests. Sarah, always so astute in business, capable of detecting a problematic clause in a 50-page contract with a single glance, was blind when it came to Richard. "He's good for us. He completes us," she insisted when her mother or close friends expressed concern about the speed of the relationship, the subtle changes in her behavior, the fact that Richard seemed to know every detail of her personal and business finances in such a short time. "I've never seen Mom so blindly in love, so willing to ignore danger signs," Ethan thought, as he watched the transformation of the strong and independent woman he had always admired into someone who consulted her new partner for every decision, as if her confidence and self-esteem were being slowly drained, replaced by an emotional dependency that the boy instinctively recognized as dangerous. That fateful night, Ethan's sleep was interrupted by an intense thirst. The boy got up silently, accustomed to moving around the house without waking anyone. The mansion, normally a haven of comfort and security, seemed different during the early hours. Elongated shadows cast by the moonlight streaming through the windows, occasional creaks of the old wood, the heavy silence that seemed to amplify every little sound. Descending the marble stairs with bare feet, feeling the cold of the stone against his skin, Ethan intended only to fetch water from the kitchen and return to the comfort of his bed. The only sounds were the ticking of the antique clock in the hallway, a relic that had belonged to his grandfather, and the gentle wind that lightly swayed the cream silk curtains in the living room, creating dancing shadows on the walls. It was then that he heard Richard's voice coming from his mother's office, that different tone, harsh, devoid of the charm and sweetness he used when Sarah was around. A tone that confirmed all the suspicions the boy had harbored for months, a tone that revealed the true nature behind the charming facade. "I'm almost getting it, friend. I have access to all the company's accounts. Sarah suspects nothing. When we transfer the money, I'll disappear and leave this naive woman in misery. She trusts me completely. She gave me access to everything," Richard said, his voice laden with a cruelty that made Ethan's blood run cold in his veins as he remained motionless in the dark hallway, his heart beating so hard he feared being discovered by the sound alone. "And her son? Won't he cause problems?" asked the voice on the phone, audible in the absolute silence of the night, amplified by the emptiness of the sleeping house. "I don't care about that unbearable brat. He suspects me. But Sarah is so in love that she chooses to believe me instead of her own son. Pathetic how love makes people stupid," Richard replied with evident contempt, each word like a stab in Ethan's heart, confirming his worst fears. Instead of heading to the kitchen, Ethan silently approached the half-open office door, his heart racing with each cautious step on the Persian rug that muffled his movements. The yellowish light from the lamp, a gift Sarah had received from her late husband, projected Richard's shadow onto the opposite wall, distorted and enlarged like the physical representation of the threat he posed. The man paced back and forth, phone pressed against his ear, gesticulating with an intensity Ethan had never witnessed, his face contorted in an expression of greed and malevolent satisfaction that contrasted completely with the loving demeanor he displayed for Sarah. Through the crack in the door, Ethan could see documents scattered across the desk, contracts, bank statements, papers with his mother's company letterhead, all carefully arranged like pieces of a meticulous plan. The shock of the revelation was so great that Ethan lost control of his trembling hands. The glass of water he had brought from the kitchen slipped through his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor in a noise that seemed deafening in the silence of the early morning, like thunder announcing a devastating storm. For a moment, everything stopped. Ethan's breathing, Richard's words on the phone. Even time itself seemed suspended in that instant of revelation, frozen in a frame of impending horror. Then, with frightening speed, the office door swung open fully. Richard was there, his eyes transformed from kind to threatening in seconds, like a mask being ripped off to reveal the monster behind the charming facade. His once relaxed posture now tense like a predator before its prey, shoulders raised, jaw clenched, hands curled into fists. Ethan felt his legs weaken, a chill running down his spine as shards of glass glittered around his bare feet, perfect symbols of how his security had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. "What did you hear, boy?" Richard asked, his voice reduced to a threatening whisper that seemed more terrifying than any shout, each syllable laden with a veiled promise of dire consequences. "Nothing. I swear I didn't hear anything. I just came to get water," Ethan stuttered, his body visibly trembling as he took a step back, feeling a shard of glass slightly scratch his heel, an insignificant pain compared to the terror that now dominated every cell of his body. The transformation in Richard was complete and terrifying. There was no longer any trace of the charming and kind man who had won over his mother. In his place was someone with cold, calculating eyes, someone whose smile didn't reach his eyes, someone whose movements resembled a feline about to attack its defenseless prey. He approached Ethan with slow and deliberate steps, each one increasing the boy's terror, each inch of proximity amplifying the feeling of imminent danger that enveloped the hallway. The hallway, once a familiar and safe place Ethan had passed through thousands of times in his life, now seemed like an inescapable trap, a narrow tunnel closing in around him. Ethan could smell Richard's expensive perfume, mixed with something harsher, perhaps the scent of fear, perhaps the true odor of evil that had been disguised for so long. The man was now just inches away, his shadow completely engulfing the boy's small figure against the wall, his suffocating presence making even the act of breathing a challenge. "If you say a word to your mother, I'll destroy her life. I have friends in important places. I can make her lose the company, the house, and most importantly, you. Imagine what it would be like, Ethan, to see your mother destroyed, in misery, with nothing, all because of you," he said, leaning down so that his eyes were level with Ethan's, ensuring that the boy saw the truth in every threatening word, in every terrible promise. "Please, don't hurt my mother." "I'll do whatever you want, but please don't hurt my mom," Ethan pleaded, feeling tears well up in his eyes, not out of fear for himself, but out of terror for what could happen to the woman he loved most in the world, the woman who had raised him alone, who had sacrificed so many years of her life to ensure his well-being. The smile that formed on Richard's face at that moment was the most frightening Ethan had ever witnessed. There was no joy in it, only a cruel satisfaction at realizing the power he held over the boy, a perverse pleasure at seeing the fear in the young eyes staring back at him. With calculated movements, he took Ethan by the arm, not with enough force to physically hurt him, but with enough firmness to demonstrate absolute control over the situation, over the boy's fate and that of his mother, and led him into the study like a prisoner being taken to his cell. The door closed softly behind them with a soft click that sounded like a final sentence, the sound of freedom and safety being locked out, leaving Ethan alone with the man who had just revealed his true nature. The room, which Ethan had always associated with his mother's dedicated work, with its shelves of inspiring books and family photographs in silver frames, now seemed like a courtroom where he was about to hear his condemnation, a place where innocence faced the purest evil. Richard released his arm and walked over to the elegant dark wood desk that dominated the center of the study. Opening a drawer with a small golden key he took from the pocket of his silk robe. The boy remained paralyzed near the door, like a small animal hypnotized by the presence of a predator, his eyes unable to look away from the man's precise and controlled movements, the man who, he was now absolutely certain, represented a real and immediate danger to his family, to everything he loved. The silence in the office was dense, heavy, interrupted only by the sound of the wind that had now grown stronger outside, as if nature were responding to the tension within those walls. The photographs in the frames, happy moments frozen in time, Genuine smiles of a family that had once been whole seemed to watch the scene helplessly, silent witnesses to a drama unfolding in the darkness of the night. "And to make sure you got the message," Richard said, pulling a folder of documents from inside the drawer and opening it before Ethan's wide eyes, spreading papers across the table like a player revealing his winning cards. "Look at this. These are papers that can incriminate your mother for frauds that I committed using her name. Forged signatures, manipulated contracts, all perfectly crafted. If you talk, I'll hand this over to the authorities. Your mother will go to prison and you to an orphanage. Do you understand what's at stake now, smart boy? Why are you doing this to us? What did we do to deserve this?" Ethan asked, his voice almost inaudible, a whisper broken by fear and incomprehension in the face of such cruelty, as a solitary tear streamed down his childlike face, which on that night seemed to have aged years in just minutes, forced to confront a reality no child should be prepared for. The morning arrived with its first rays of sun piercing through the curtains of Ethan's bedroom, as he had been unable to sleep after the confrontation with Richard. He had spent the night tossing and turning, reliving every threatening word, every intimidating gesture, every document the man had exhibited with cruel pleasure. The boy finally got up when the clock struck 6, dragging himself to the bathroom where he avoided looking at his own reflection in the mirror, fearing to find the same terror he still felt running through his veins. The cold shower water could not wash away the weight he carried on his shoulders, nor could it clear the thoughts that jostled in his mind. How could he warn his mother without putting her in danger? How could he protect her from someone who slept by her side, who had access to everything she had built with so much effort? Ethan dressed slowly, choosing a long-sleeved shirt despite the hot day that was announced, as if the fabric could serve as armor against the world that had suddenly become hostile. He descended the stairs with hesitant steps, each step a conscious effort that brought him closer to the man he now feared more than anything. "It's just another day. I need to act normally. For Mom, I need to be strong," he murmured to himself as he reached the last step, taking a deep breath to control the tremor in his hands. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well?" Sarah asked as she saw him enter the kitchen, her radiant smile painfully contrasting with the anguish he felt. The kitchen, normally the welcoming heart of the home with its aromas of freshly brewed coffee and fresh bread, now seemed like a minefield to Ethan. Sarah moved with her usual energy, preparing breakfast while talking about plans for the day, completely oblivious to the transformation that had occurred the night before, to the threat that loomed over their heads. The boy sat silently at the table, observing the plate his mother had placed in front of him. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit cut into star shapes as she had done since he was little, a gesture of love that now intensified his pain. His stomach protested at the thought of eating, tightening into a knot that made every bite an almost impossible challenge. Deep circles marked his young face, standing out against the pallor that had replaced his usual healthy glow. With conscious effort, he tried to bring a piece of toast to his mouth, but the food seemed like sawdust against his palate. Sarah, ever attentive to changes in her son, soon noticed that something was wrong, her expression shifting from morning joy to maternal concern in a matter of seconds. "Son, is something happening? You look different. You're pale, you've barely touched your food. Are you sick?" she questioned, approaching to touch his forehead in search of signs of fever, a gesture that had always comforted him, but now only intensified his guilt for hiding the truth. "I'm fine, Mom, just tired from the exams. We have final assessments this week, and I've been studying late," Ethan replied, averting his gaze, unable to sustain eye contact with those eyes identical to his own, fearing she might read the truth on his face, as she always had throughout his life. The tension in the air was broken by the sound of firm footsteps approaching. Richard entered the kitchen with the confidence of an actor who perfectly masters his role. He wore casual yet elegant clothes, his hair still damp from the shower, exuding that cologne that once seemed sophisticated but now caused nausea in Ethan. He walked straight to Sarah, enveloping her by the waist and kissing her with false devotion. The contrast between this caring man and the threatening monster of the previous night was so shocking that Ethan felt a wave of rage coursing through his body. How could he represent it so perfectly? How could his mother, always so intelligent and perceptive, not notice the falsity in every gesture, every word. Richard turned to the boy with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, those same eyes that hours earlier overflowed with threats. The silent message was clear. Nothing had changed. The danger remained real. The silence agreement remained valid. Ethan felt his body stiffen, the spoon in his hand trembling slightly against the edge of the plate. "Good morning, family." "What a delicious breakfast, Sarah. You always outdo yourself," exclaimed Richard with calculated enthusiasm, serving himself generously before turning his attention back to the boy. "Sarah, don't pressure the boy. This adolescent phase is complicated, full of hormones and changes. Isn't that right, Ethan? I remember well how difficult it is." "Yes, it's complicated," Ethan replied dryly, his gaze fixed on his plate, feeling the weight of Richard's gaze upon him, that gaze that carried with it the silent reminder of the threat that hung over his family. The days that followed became an exercise in endurance for Ethan. Each morning required a new dose of courage to get up and face the man who threatened to destroy everything he loved. Each night brought the terror of encountering Richard in the dark hallways, always with that smile that carried silent threats, always with seemingly innocent comments that only the boy understood as reminders of the power he held. His school performance, once a source of pride for Sarah, began to deteriorate rapidly. Ethan, who had always been participative and attentive, now spent classes staring out the window, lost in thoughts about how to protect his mother. His grades dropped, assignments were left incomplete, teachers' questions were answered with monosyllables or silence. During breaks, he withdrew from friends, preferring isolated corners of the schoolyard where he could be alone with his fears. Dark circles became a permanent feature on her young face, her appetite practically non-existent, her spontaneous smile a distant memory. However, the worst was witnessing how Richard was gaining more and more space in Sarah's company, always suggesting meetings with new investors, always proposing changes to the financial structure, always insisting on having access to more privileged information. It was like watching a predator slowly circling its prey, getting closer and closer for the final strike. "We need to talk about what's happening with you, son." "The teachers called again today," Sarah commented one night, entering Ethan's room where he pretended to do his homework, the notebook open on the same page for over an hour. "Nothing's happening, Mom. I'm just tired." "It'll pass soon, I promise," he replied, trying to smile, an effort that resulted only in a sad contortion of the lips that used to open easily into smiles. The situation reached a critical point when, during art class, teacher Pamela asked the students to express their feelings through free drawings. Ethan, always reluctant in artistic activities because he preferred exact sciences, surprisingly surrendered himself to the task with unusual intensity. His fingers moved quickly over the paper, firm and dark strokes forming figures that emanated an almost palpable anguish. Without realizing it, he was transferring onto the paper the terror he kept imprisoned within himself. A disproportionately larger adult male figure, with a sinister smile and outstretched clawed hands, dominated the center of the sheet. Behind it, turned away, a female figure seemed oblivious to the danger, enveloped in a kind of mist that suggested blindness or ignorance of the threat so close by. Among them, a small childlike figure was surrounded by lines reminiscent of prison bars, separated from the female figure by an insurmountable barrier, the eyes exaggeratedly large and frightened, the hands outstretched in a silent plea for help that would never come. The drawing was disturbing in its raw honesty, a cry for help disguised as a school exercise. Pamela, an experienced educator who always paid special attention to her students' artistic expressions, collected Ethan's work with growing concern. This was not the typical drawing of a preteen. It was the visual representation of trauma, a desperate call for intervention. "Ethan, I'd like you to stay a little after class. Can we talk about your drawing?" she asked softly, noting how the boy visibly shrank as he realized his work had drawn attention. "There's nothing to talk about, teacher. It's just a drawing." "I can do another one if it didn't turn out well," he replied quickly, trying to retrieve the paper now in the educator's hands, panic evident in every gesture. The next day, Sarah received a call from the school requesting her urgent presence. She rearranged her schedule, cancelling 2 important meetings, worried by the grave tone of the secretary on the phone. She arrived at the institution 20 minutes before the scheduled time, her heart tight with possibilities. Was Ethan sick? Had he been involved in a fight? Had he suffered an accident during physical education? None of the scenarios she considered, however, prepared her for the conversation she was about to have. She was led not to the infirmary or the principal's office as she expected, but to the teacher's lounge, where Pamela awaited her with an expression that was both serious and compassionate. The teacher, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a firm posture, pointed to a chair and offered a glass of water before starting the conversation that would forever change Sarah's perspective. On the table between them, a closed folder awaited, like a ticking time bomb about to explode, destructive in its silent truth. "Ma'am, thank you for coming so quickly. I know your schedule is busy, but this matter really couldn't wait," Pamela began, her professional voice not completely hiding her genuine concern. "I'm very worried about Ethan. Did something serious happen? Is he hurt? Is he sick?" Sarah asked, leaning forward, the apprehension evident in every line of her normally controlled face, as darker possibilities raced through her mind at dizzying speed. Pamela took a deep breath, carefully choosing her words. Years of experience had taught her that moments like this required as much tact as honesty. She slowly opened the folder on the table, revealing the drawing Ethan had produced in the previous class. That visceral representation of fear and helplessness, of imminent and invisible danger for one who should protect. She closely watched Sarah's reaction, looking for signs that might indicate prior knowledge of the situation, denial or worse, complicity. What she saw, however, was genuine confusion followed by growing horror, as the woman absorbed the disturbing details of the image created by her son. Sarah's elegant hands, always so steady when signing million-dollar contracts or presenting new products, trembled slightly as they touched the paper, as if trying to physically connect with the suffering her son had expressed through those desperate strokes. Her eyes, identical to Ethan's in shape and color, scanned every detail of the drawing with growing comprehension and anguish. "Mrs. Parker, I'm very concerned about Ethan. He was one of the best students, always participative, creative, sociable. In recent months, however, we noticed significant changes in his behavior. He is inattentive, isolated, his grades have dropped drastically. Yesterday, during art class, I found this drawing of his. As an educator for over 15 years, I've learned to recognize when a child is expressing suffering through art. This drawing has concerning elements that I cannot ignore," Pamela explained, pointing to specific details in the image. "See how the adult figure is threatening, how the female figure has her back turned, oblivious to the danger, and how the child seems imprisoned, separated from maternal protection. I don't understand. Ethan seemed quieter, yes, but I attributed it to fatigue, final exams, perhaps his age. Teenagers change, become more reserved," Sarah mumbled, more to herself than to the teacher, her world beginning to crumble before that impossible-to-ignore evidence, the pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to fit together in her mind. The teacher leaned forward, her voice softening but maintaining the firmness necessary for the seriousness of the moment. It wasn't the first time she faced delicate situations involving her students, but each case still affected her deeply, reminding her of the responsibility she carried. "Mrs. Parker, has something happened at home? Have there been recent changes in the family routine? New relationships, perhaps, conflicts, situations that may have affected Ethan's sense of security?" she carefully asked, watching as the woman in front of her visibly paled, as if each word were a painful revelation. Sarah stared fixedly at the drawing, feeling a tightness in her heart that made even the act of breathing a conscious effort. The implications of what she saw were too terrible to be processed all at once. The shadowy male figure, now that she observed closely, had features that vaguely resembled Richard, the same stature, the same dominant posture. The female figure with her back turned, oblivious to the danger, was clearly herself. The hair, the posture, even the type of clothing she usually wore. And between them, separated, imprisoned, terrified, was her son, her greatest treasure, the one she had sworn to protect above all else. How had she not noticed? How could she have been so blind? Fragments of recent memories began to rearrange themselves in her mind. Ethan refusing to be alone with Richard, the silence at the dinner table, the frequent nightmares that woke him screaming in the middle of the night, the loss of appetite, the hesitant attempts to talk about the new partner that she always deflected, convinced it was just childish jealousy. Each ignored sign now screamed in her consciousness. Each dismissed alert returned with devastating force. Yes, there have been changes. My partner, Richard, moved into our house a few months ago. Ethan never seemed completely comfortable with his presence, but I thought it was normal, that he just needed time to adjust, Sarah confessed, the words coming out with difficulty, each one carrying the weight of her possible failure as a mother, her inability to perceive her son's suffering. Children are extremely perceptive, Mrs. Parker. Sometimes they see things that we adults in our haste and complexity overlook. This drawing is a cry for help. Ethan is communicating something he can't or doesn't feel safe to express in words, Pamela explained. Gentle but direct, fulfilling her professional and moral duty to protect her student. I strongly recommend that you seek professional help for Ethan, someone specialized in child psychology who can help him process what he's feeling, and in the meantime, observe the dynamics in your home closely. Trust the signals your son is sending. I'll do that immediately, thank you for showing me. For caring so much, Sarah replied, her voice trembling but determined, the resolution forming quickly in her mother's heart. Nothing and no one would hurt her son, not even the man she thought she loved. With the drawing carefully tucked into her bag, like physical evidence of the nightmare that apparently unfolded in her own home, Sarah said goodbye to the teacher and walked down the empty school hallway, her heels echoing against the ceramic floor, each step increasing her determination. She needed to talk to Ethan, make him feel safe to share whatever was happening. She needed to observe Richard with new eyes, alert to signs her love-struck heart would have ignored. She needed to protect her son, her life's work, her very life. As she walked towards the parking lot, lost in increasingly gloomy thoughts about the man she had allowed to enter her life so completely, her phone rang. The display showed the company's accounting number, probably some issue about the monthly closing that could wait until she resolved more pressing matters. She hesitated, considering letting the call go to voicemail, but years of business responsibility spoke louder. She answered while unlocking her car, pressing the phone between her shoulder and ear. Mrs. Parker, this is accounting. Sorry to bother you, but something has come up that needs your immediate attention, said the voice on the other end, tense and hesitant, clearly uncomfortable with what they were about to communicate. Yes, I'm listening. What happened? Sarah responded automatically, her mind still partially occupied with the recent revelations about Ethan, making plans to protect him, doubting the man she had let into her life. We found some suspicious transfers in the company's accounts. Large sums, recipient not registered in our usual system of suppliers or partners. Did you authorize a transfer of $500,000 last night? The accountant asked, concern evident in every carefully chosen word. Sarah's world stopped. The phone nearly slipped from her suddenly cold hand. $500,000, unauthorized transfer. Last night, when she was at an external meeting, leaving Ethan alone with Richard at home. The pieces brutally fell into place in her mind. Ethan's drawing, her son's changed behavior, Richard's insistent questions about the company's finances, his sudden interest in having access to passwords and documents. Her stomach contracted with sudden nausea as the reality hit her like a high-speed train. It was not just her heart that was in danger, it was her entire life, everything she had built, her son's future. The voice on the phone kept calling her name, concerned about the sudden silence. But Sarah could barely hear through the roar in her ears, the sound of her world crumbling around her. Sarah drove with trembling hands through the busy streets, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions after the conversation with the teacher and the call from accounting. The numbers on the company account did not add up, and Ethan's drawing burned in her bag like a silent accusation she could no longer ignore. 2 tears escaped her eyes as she struggled to maintain control of the vehicle, the cruel reality finally penetrating the fog of happiness she had lived in for the past few months. The phone rang repeatedly, Richard, insistent, but she let it go to voicemail, unable to speak to the man who had possibly betrayed her trust in such devastating ways. She needed to think. needed advice, needed someone who had always told her the truth even when it hurt. Without consciously planning it, she found herself driving to the old part of town, where traditional mansions withstood time as silent witnesses to generations past. She parked abruptly in front of a classical-style mansion, surrounded by an impeccably tended garden, where red roses bloomed in contrast with the white facade. The home of her childhood, the refuge where she had always found wisdom in times of crisis, the fortress of the one who had never hesitated to tell difficult truths, her mother's house. Why didn't I trust my instincts from the start? Why did I ignore all the signs? She muttered to herself as she crossed the wrought iron gate, feeling the weight of wrong decisions with every tired step. The eyes of love are blind, my daughter. They have always been and always will be, your mother would reply minutes later, with the sharp wisdom of her well-lived 68 years. Sarah could hardly wait for the maid to fully open the door before barging in like a hurricane into the residence where she had grown up. Her high heels echoed against the marble floor as she crossed the entrance hall adorned with family paintings, photographs of past and present generations. The house maintained the characteristic aroma of her childhood, a mixture of fresh flowers, old books, and her mother's unmistakable perfume she had worn for decades. Lady Dorothy was in the living room, seated in her favorite armchair by the window overlooking the garden, an open book in her lap and her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Upon seeing her daughter's state, disheveled hair, makeup smeared by barely contained tears, her entire body tense as a violin string about to snap, the matriarch immediately closed the book and removed her glasses, an expression of concern replacing her former tranquility. In seconds, with surprising agility for her age, she was on her feet, arms outstretched to receive the daughter who clearly needed her embrace, her strength, her guidance. Sarah ran into those arms, as she had done so many times throughout her life, from scraped childhood knees to a broken teenage heart, from the insecurity of her first days as a businesswoman to the devastation of early widowhood. Now in crisis again, she sought the safe harbor that had never failed her. "Mother, I'm desperate," Sarah exclaimed as she entered the welcoming arms, the first words coming out choked by the emotion she had struggled to control during the entire journey there. "They found suspicious transfers in the company's accounts that I didn't authorize, and now Ethan is having problems at school. The teacher showed me a disturbing drawing he made. Everything is crumbling around me." "Calm down, my daughter. Take a deep breath and organize your thoughts. Crises are moments of clarity for those who can look at them with courage," replied Mrs. Dorothy, with the loving firmness that had always been her trademark when dealing with family problems. "Mrs." Dorothy led Sarah to the tea room, a cozy environment with comfortable armchairs, shelves filled with well-kept books, and large windows that let in natural light filtered through delicate lace curtains. It was there that over decades, the women of the family had gathered to discuss problems, make important decisions, share joys and sorrows. The tradition continued now, as the matriarch motioned for her daughter to sit, while she herself headed to the small console, where she kept a set of fine porcelain tea, an inheritance from her own mother. With precise and elegant gestures, despite her time-worn hands, she prepared an infusion of chamomile and calming herbs, the same ritual she always performed whenever someone in the family needed comfort and mental clarity. The subtle aroma of the herbs slowly filled the room, creating an atmosphere conducive to confidentiality and reflection. Sarah watched her mother's movements, finding comfort in the familiarity of that ritual she had witnessed since childhood. Mrs. Dorothy, with her erect posture and penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances, emanated the serenity of someone who had already faced enough storms not to be easily shaken. Her hair, now completely white, was elegantly arranged in a traditional bun, and her clothes, although simple, carried the timeless elegance that no fortune could buy without the refined taste that only true class possesses. "Sit down, my daughter," said Mrs. Dorothy, serving the tea in delicate cups before settling into the armchair opposite Sarah's. "I knew that man would bring trouble. I never trusted him. From the very first time I brought him here, I noticed that calculating gleam in his eyes, that excessive courtesy that hides more than it reveals." "How did you know, Mom? I didn't see any of that. How was I so blind?" Sarah asked, holding the cup with both hands, seeking comfort in the warmth emanating from the porcelain, struggling against the feeling of having failed not only herself, but mainly Ethan. Mrs. Dorothy's words, although harsh, contained no accusation, only the direct honesty that had always characterized her way of loving. As she spoke, her eyes revealed a mixture of maternal concern and the wisdom of one who had already seen similar scripts unfold before, in other lives, in other families. She had always been a keen observer of human nature, able to detect falsehood with an almost supernatural precision. In the few encounters she had with Richard, she had noticed the small inconsistencies in his behavior, the way his gaze wandered around the room evaluating valuables when he thought no one noticed, the way his stories about the past changed slightly with each repetition, the excessive interest in the company's operations when Sarah was not around. Small details that, added together, formed a disturbing picture that now materialized in the revelations of that day. The matriarch took a sip of tea, organizing her thoughts before continuing the conversation that could redefine her daughter's and grandson's future. But he has been so good to us. He helped expand the company, suggested investments that really paid off, stood by my side in difficult times, Sarah argued weakly, part of her still struggling against the truth that was becoming more and more evident, like someone trying to hold water between their fingers. Love or interest in your money and your company? What were you doing with those men, the matriarch questioned, leaning forward intently, her words striking Sarah like precise little arrows. Just yesterday I saw you at the Royal Hotel with two men of suspicious appearance. I was going to visit my friend Barbara when I spotted you all in the restaurant. They didn't notice me, but I could observe them. Richard handed papers to them, documents that seemed important. It looked like a tense negotiation, not a simple meeting of investors as he told you. It can't be. He told me he was in a meeting with potential business partners. Sarah mumbled, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet, the teacup trembling slightly in her hands, spilling a few drops of tea onto the porcelain saucer. The tea room, normally a place of comfort and serenity, now seemed too small to contain the magnitude of the revelations unfolding. Through the window, dark clouds began to form on the horizon, as if the very sky responded to the drama playing out in that intimate space between mother and daughter. Sarah stood up abruptly, unable to remain seated as her world crumbled piece by piece. She walked to the window, observing the garden where she had played as a child, where Ethan had also spent happy moments visiting his grandmother. The mention of her son made her heart ache again. It wasn't just her broken heart at stake. It was Ethan's emotional security, his well-being, his sense of protection that had apparently been violated by the man she had brought into their lives. Donna Dorothy silently watched her daughter for a few moments, giving her space to process the information, to begin accepting painful truths that could no longer be ignored. When she spoke again, her voice carried not only the authority of a matriarch, but the unconditional love of a concerned grandmother for her only grandson. And last week, when Ethan came to visit me, he was different. He has always been a happy, curious boy, full of stories to tell and questions to ask. But this time, he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, dark circles under his eyes, slumped shoulders, that bright intelligence in his eyes replaced by something I can only describe as fear. When I tried to talk to him, to ask if everything was all right at home, he quickly changed the subject. A 12-year-old boy should not have that look, Sarah. He should not fear speaking about what happens in his own home, continued Mrs. Dorothy, every word increasing Sarah's anguish but also strengthening her determination to take action. My son, my little Ethan. How did I not notice what was happening right under my nose? Sarah murmured to herself, guilt mingling with her growing anger as she thought of her son's silent suffering. The rain began to fall outside, heavy drops beating against the window panes in a rhythm that resembled a racing heart. Sarah slowly returned to her armchair, the initial shock giving way to a cold determination that Mrs. Dorothy immediately recognized. It was the same look she herself had had when, decades earlier, she had faced crises that threatened to destroy the family. The strength of that lineage of women, transmitted through generations, now manifested itself on the face of the successful businesswoman who, for a few months, had allowed herself to forget that before being a lover, she was a mother. Before being a companion, she was the protector of her legacy. Mrs. Dorothy offered more tea, which Sarah refused with a gentle gesture. Now was not the time for comfort. It was time for action, for strategy, for the fierce protection of what truly mattered. The matriarch nodded in silent approval, recognizing the warrior she had always known existed within her daughter. The teacher showed me a drawing that Ethan made. A menacing male figure, a woman with her back to the danger, a child trapped, separated from his mother by bars. It's so obvious now, looking back. The signs were all there, the changed behavior, the dropping grades, the isolation. And I too busy, too smitten, too blind to see what was happening to my own son, Sarah confessed, her voice choked with emotion, but her eyes already dry, determination replacing the initial despair. The past cannot be changed, daughter, but the future is still in your hands. What's important now is protecting Ethan and your company. Richard will not destroy what took years to build, nor will he further traumatize your son, Donna Dorothy responded with unwavering firmness, leaning forward to hold her daughter's hands in hers. The afternoon wore on as mother and daughter discussed possibilities, analyzed situations, devised strategies. Donna Dorothy's life experience complemented Sarah's analytical intelligence, creating a combined force that would be formidable against any threat. They discussed the legal, financial, and emotional aspects of the situation. How to protect the company until they could verify the extent of the damage. How to approach Ethan so he would feel safe to reveal whatever Richard had said or done to terrorize him. How to gather concrete evidence that could be used if the situation reached the authorities. Every possibility was carefully analyzed, every potential obstacle considered and circumvented. Protection strategies, contingency plans, support networks. Nothing was left to chance that afternoon of family conspiracy where the sole objective was to protect what truly mattered. As they talked, the rain outside gradually subsided, as if nature itself responded to the strengthening of Sarah's resolve, to the increasingly clear strategies forming between the two women. A ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds, creating a partial rainbow visible through the window, a symbol of hope after the storm that did not go unnoticed by Donna Dorothy, ever attentive to signs and symbolism. Sarah, trust your mother's instinct. No one knows Ethan better than you, no one loves him more deeply. If you feel that Richard is terrorizing your son or stealing your company, do not ignore those signs again. We need concrete evidence, something that cannot be explained or justified by that seductive tongue he possesses, said Donna Dorothy, rising with characteristic elegance and heading towards an antique desk in the corner of the room. Evidence that can be used legally if necessary, something that reveals his true nature, his real intentions, agreed Sarah, watching as her mother opened a drawer and retrieved a small rectangular object. Donna Dorothy returned with firm steps, holding what appeared to be a discreet digital recorder, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. The device was new, still in its original packaging, evidently recently acquired. In response to her daughter's questioning look, the matriarch explained that she had bought it weeks ago, when her suspicions about Richard began to solidify, when she noticed the changes in her grandson's behavior during his visits. She had always been a foreseeing woman, prepared for contingencies, able to anticipate problems before they fully manifested. This characteristic, which had led some to call her a pessimist throughout her life, now proved to be a valuable quality amidst the looming crisis. With precise gestures, she opened the packaging and handed the device to Sarah, explaining its simple but effective operation, small, sensitive, with long battery life and considerable storage capacity. A perfect instrument for the mission they had in mind. Use this, instructed Mrs. Dorothy, placing the small recorder in her daughter's hands as if delivering a weapon in times of war. Put it in Ethan's backpack. If that man is threatening my grandson or plotting something against his company, we'll have the proof we need. The device is sensitive enough to pick up conversations, even at low volume. Ethan won't have to do anything but keep his backpack nearby when he's with Richard. Mom, this is, I don't know if it's legal, recording someone without consent. Sarah hesitated, always cautious about ethical and legal issues, even in the midst of crisis. My daughter, there are times when we need to choose between what is conventionally right and what is necessary to protect those we love. This is one of those times, Mrs. Dorothy replied. with the wisdom of someone who has lived long enough to understand that life rarely offers perfectly clean choices in truly critical situations. Silence hovered between them for a few moments, heavy with implications, with decisions that would alter the course of their lives. Sarah looked at the small device in her hands, feeling its symbolic weight much greater than its physical one. Using it meant fully accepting that her life with Richard had been an illusion, that the man she had loved in recent weeks was not who he appeared to be. It also meant taking active steps to unmask the truth, whatever it might be. But what if they were mistaken? What if there were reasonable explanations for everything? The transfers, Ethan's behavior, even the woman at the hotel. But even as these thoughts crossed her mind, Sarah knew they were merely the last gasps of a denial she could no longer sustain. Ethan's drawing, the unauthorized transfers, the changes in her son's behavior. There were too many patterns to be ignored, too many coincidences to be explained in isolation. The analytical businesswoman inside her, accustomed to identifying trends and making data-driven projections, could no longer deny the accumulating evidence. "You're right, Mum. Ethan is my absolute priority. If Richard is doing something to terrorize him, I need to know. And if he's stealing the company I built for my son's future, I need to know that too. I can no longer ignore the signs," she finally decided, putting the recorder in her purse with determined movements, her mind already formulating an action plan for when she got home. "That's my daughter. The strong woman I raised, the fierce mother Ethan deserves." Donna Dorothy approved with evident pride, taking her daughter's hands in hers one last time before she prepared to leave. The moment of family intimacy and conspiracy was suddenly interrupted by the shrill sound of Sarah's cell phone. The device vibrated in her bag, demanding immediate attention with its insistent melody. With a resigned sigh, Sarah retrieved the phone, already anticipating who would be calling at that hour, after her visits to the school and the company's accounting department. Richard's name blinked on the screen, confirming her suspicions. For a moment she considered not answering, continuing the conversation with her mother, finalizing the plans that were starting to take shape. But the strategist inside her knew that any abrupt change in her behavior could alert him, make him suspect that something had changed. She needed to keep up appearances until she had concrete evidence, until she knew exactly what she was facing. With a meaningful look at Donna Dorothy, indicating that she would take the call, Sarah took a deep breath and answered, striving to make her voice sound normal, carefree, as it would be on any ordinary day before that afternoon's revelations. "Honey, we need to talk," came Richard's voice through the device, his tone carefully modulated between concern and affection. "I know you were at accounting today. I have something important to tell you when I get home." "Sure, Richard." "We also need to talk. I'll be home soon," Sarah replied, surprised by her own ability to keep her voice steady as her heart raced with a mixture of apprehension and newly discovered determination. Sarah drove back home, her mother's recorder stored in her bag like a bomb about to explode. Her thoughts alternated between strategies and doubts as her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly enough for her knuckles to turn white. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange, a beauty that cruelly contrasted with the inner storm she faced. At every red light, she felt the urge to turn around, pick up Ethan from a friend's house where he was studying, and never return to the mansion she shared with Richard. But the calculating businesswoman within her knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. She needed concrete proof. She needed to protect her assets. She needed to unmask the man who threatened everything she had built. The recorder weighed heavily in her bag, a promise of truth, a tool of justice. As she parked in the spacious garage, she took several deep breaths, preparing herself for the most challenging role she had ever played, that of a woman still in love and confident, completely oblivious to the suspicions that now dominated her heart. Her phone vibrated, a message from her mother. "Stay strong, my daughter. Remember who you are." Those simple words brought tears to her eyes, quickly wiped away before they could betray the emotional turmoil consuming her. How did we reach this point? How did I allow him to enter so deeply into our lives? She murmured to herself as she turned off the engine and composed her expression in the rearview mirror. "Sayua Sarah, you built an empire from scratch. You raised a wonderful son on your own. You can face this predator," she responded to her own reflection, adjusting her hair and forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As soon as she opened the door to the mansion, she was greeted by the unmistakable aroma of her favorite meal. The lights were strategically dimmed, creating a romantic atmosphere that now seemed a cruel irony. Richard appeared in the entrance hall, impeccably dressed, with a champagne glass in each hand and that smile that once accelerated her heart, but which she now recognized as the perfect facade for his true intentions. He walked towards her with his usual unwavering confidence, offering her a glass with studied, elegant gestures. The same man who, according to her mother, had been in a suspicious meeting at the hotel. The same man her son feared. The same man who had possibly misappropriated considerable funds from his company. Sarah accepted the glass, forcing a smile while struggling against the urge to throw the bubbly liquid in his perfectly shaved face. She allowed him to kiss her cheek, feeling a shudder of revulsion that she disguised as fatigue. His proximity, which once brought comfort, now suffocated her. The scent she once found so sophisticated now seemed nauseating, excessive, like everything about that man who had entered her life as a charming prince and now revealed himself as the villain of her personal fairy tale. Every second of pretense was a conscious effort, every forced smile a victory over the instinct to confront him immediately. "Dear, I know you're worried about the transfers, but it was just an investment I made to expand the company in Europe. I should have consulted you first," Richard explained in that soothing voice he used when he wanted to convince her of something, guiding her to the dining room where an elaborate meal awaited. "You made a decision involving $500,000 without consulting me, Richard," Sarah replied, carefully measuring her tone to sound more hurt than suspicious. "I thought we had a partnership, that important decisions would be made together." The dining room, normally a space of comfort and family celebrations, had transformed into a stage where they both played carefully calculated roles. Richard poured more champagne, his fluid and controlled movements like those of an experienced dancer, while he elaborated a complex explanation about market opportunities, favorable return rates, and strategic business connections. Terms he knew would impress her, data that would normally convince her of the alleged investment's solidity. Sarah listened attentively, no longer for the veracity of the information, but analyzing the ease with which he lied, the skill with which he built a house of cards she would have previously accepted without question. The years as an executive had taught her to recognize dishonesty in negotiations, a skill that inexplicably failed when dealing with Richard in her personal life. Now, however, with her eyes open to recent revelations, she perceived the minor inconsistencies in his narrative, the contradictory information, the excess of technical details that served only to confuse and impress. With each new lie he elaborated, her stomach contracted, but she maintained an interested demeanor, asking strategic questions that encouraged him to delve deeper into his own web of falsehoods. His smile was convincing, his body language carefully calculated to maximize the impact of his words. His eyes shone with false sincerity. It was a performance of manipulation that had once captivated her, but which she now saw with painful clarity. "It really was a unique opportunity, Sarah. We had to act quickly or we would have lost out to the competition. I did what I thought was best for our future, for the expansion you've always dreamed of," Richard continued, leaning forward to cover her hand with his, an intimate gesture that would have melted her before. "Our future. It's interesting how you already consider yourself a permanent part of the company I built alone for years," Sarah thought, but she responded with a forced smile. "I understand the urgency, but we need to establish clear boundaries about financial decisions of this magnitude." The night dragged on like a terminal illness, each minute a small death for Sarah, as she struggled to maintain appearances. She vaguely agreed when he suggested a trip to oversee the new investment, avoided committing when he mentioned the possibility of formally including him in the company's corporate structure, changed the subject when he tried to access information about other financial resources he still didn't control. Each attempt of his confirmed her suspicions, each seemingly innocent suggestion revealed another angle of the plan she could now see with crystal clarity. When she finally retreated to sleep, claiming a severe headache after so much information to process, she felt physically exhausted from the effort of maintaining the facade. The room they shared now seemed like a prison, the double bed a minefield she needed to navigate with extreme caution. She patiently waited for him to finish his nightly routine, pretended to fall asleep quickly, and then remained motionless, breathing controlled, while he watched some program on the bedroom TV. Every second she had to pretend made her determination to expose the truth, to protect her son and her legacy stronger. When she finally heard the soft snoring that indicated Richard had fallen asleep, she allowed herself to open her eyes in the darkness, silent tears streaming down her face as she meticulously planned her next steps. "Tomorrow, Ethan. Tomorrow we begin to reclaim our life," she silently promised, her face faintly illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the partially open window. "He will never know what hit him," she concluded with a cold determination she had never experienced before, not even during the most challenging moments of her career. The following morning, Sarah patiently waited for Richard to announce his plans for the day. As she had predicted, he mentioned a tennis game with potential investors, another lie she could now easily detect, but which she received with feigned enthusiasm. "Great for strengthening business ties," she commented, while inwardly calculating how much time she would have alone with Ethan to prepare the trap that would unmask the traitor. As soon as Richard left, she moved swiftly through the house, checking to make sure he had truly departed before calling her son, who would return from his friend's house in an hour. Time was precious. She needed to instruct him properly, emotionally prepare him, ensure he understood the gravity of the situation without unnecessarily scaring him. While she waited, she reviewed the recorder her mother had given her, testing it to ensure it was functioning properly, familiarizing herself with its features, calculating where in Ethan's backpack it would be best positioned to clearly capture conversations. When she finally heard the characteristic sound of the front door opening, followed by her son's light and hesitant footsteps, so different from the confident and joyful steps he used to take before Richard's arrival, her heart raced with a mixture of determination and fear. Not for what she was about to do, but for what she might discover, for the suffering her son may have endured alone while she was blinded by passion. "Ethan, could you come to my room, please?" "We need to talk about something important," Sarah called out, keeping her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overflow. "Did something happen, Mom?" "You seem different," the boy observed as he entered the room, his keen eyes analyzing his mother's tense posture and the unusual determination in her gaze. Sarah carefully closed the bedroom door and led Ethan to the small sitting area by the window, a space where they used to share secrets and plan surprises since he was little. They sat facing each other, and she held her son's hands in hers, searching for the right words for that impossible conversation. How to explain to a child that the man who had brought into their lives, whom she had presented as a positive figure, was in fact a threat? How to ask him to participate in a plan to expose him without placing an adult responsibility too heavy on his young shoulders? The boy waited in silence, those eyes so similar to hers revealing an understanding beyond his age, a knowledge of danger that perhaps surpassed her own. Sarah took a deep breath, deciding on direct honesty. Ethan deserved to know that he was no longer alone in his fear, that his mother finally saw the truth he had tried to show in various ways. "Son, I need you to be very brave today. I've discovered some things about Richard, things that deeply concern me. I believe he is not who he claims to be," Sarah began, carefully choosing each word as she observed her son's reaction, surprised to see not shock, but relief flooding his young face. "You finally realized, Mom? He's evil, I always knew. I tried to tell you, but he said he would ruin you, that we would go to different places if I spoke," Ethan replied, the words pouring out in a torrent after weeks of being contained, tears of relief forming in his eyes. Sarah's heart broke upon hearing the confirmation of her worst fears. Her son had been threatened and terrorized within his own home, while she remained blind to his signs. Fighting the urge to wrap him in a protective embrace and never let go, she focused on the immediate task, obtaining concrete evidence that could put a definitive end to the threat Richard posed. With gentle gestures so as not to alarm Ethan, she reached for her bag and retrieved the small recorder, explaining her plan in detail. They needed irrefutable evidence of the threats, manipulations, fraudulent schemes, something that could not be explained or justified, something that exposed the true nature of that man for all to see. The boy listened attentively, determination gradually replacing fear in his youthful eyes, the possibility of liberation giving him a courage Sarah had not seen in weeks. They discussed the practical details, where to place the recorder in the backpack, how to ensure it was nearby when Richard was home, how to act naturally so as not to arouse suspicion. Ethan absorbed every instruction with seriousness, like a little soldier preparing for the most important battle of his life. Keep your backpack close whenever you're with Richard. It's very important, son. We need to capture anything he says when he thinks no one is listening, Sarah instructed, demonstrating how the device worked, where the microphone would be, how long the battery would last. I can do it, Mom. I won't let him hurt us anymore, Ethan responded with a determination surprising for his age, his eyes reflecting not only courage, but also a profound understanding of the gravity of the situation. The next day dawned with an almost palpable tension in the mansion. Sarah carefully prepared for an important meeting at the company, strategically scheduled to give Richard the necessary space to reveal his true nature in Ethan's presence, who would be at home claiming indisposition to go to school. The plan was meticulous. Sarah would be away. Richard would think he had the house to himself except for the boy's presence, and the recorder would capture any incriminating conversation or call. Before leaving, she checked the device hidden in her son's backpack one more time, hugged him longer than usual, and departed with her heart divided between the strategic need to leave and the protective instinct screaming not to leave Ethan alone with that man again. Throughout the meeting, her mind alternated between the topics discussed and concerns about what might be happening at home. She discreetly checked her phone every few minutes, half hoping for a desperate message from Ethan, half fearing Richard had discovered the plan. The hours dragged like weeks, each minute a small eternity of anxious anticipation. When she finally returned home at the end of the day, she found Ethan in his room, apparently calm but with a different gleam in his eye, a mixture of nervousness and contained triumph that immediately alerted Sarah. Something had happened. He made a call, Mum. He said terrible things about money, about fake documents, about me, Ethan whispered as soon as she entered his room, quickly closing the door behind them to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. You were very brave, my dear. Now leave it to me, Sarah replied, hugging him tightly while retrieving the recorder from his backpack, her body vibrating with a mixture of maternal fury and relentless determination. While Richard showered, Sarah locked herself in her private office and connected the recorder to her computer, her fingers trembling with anticipation. The audio file loaded quickly, and she adjusted her headphones, mentally preparing herself for what she was about to hear. In the first few minutes, only ambient household sounds could be heard, occasional footsteps, doors opening and closing. At last, Richard's voice emerged, crystal clear despite the amateur recording, speaking confidently on the phone, completely oblivious to the fact that every incriminating word was being recorded. The conversation began with pleasantries, but soon veered into the territory Sarah simultaneously feared and anticipated. Detailed plans for financial diversions, mentions of accounts in tax havens, discussions about transfers already carried out and others planned. The calculating coldness with which they spoke about defrauding their company made her stomach churn. But it was when they mentioned Ethan that she truly felt her blood boil in her veins. The casualness with which Richard described the psychological threats he had made to the boy, the evident pleasure in his voice as he recounted how he had terrified him with lies about separation, prison, orphanages, all of this ignited in Sarah a fury she had never experienced before, a primal protective instinct that overshadowed any other emotion. Everything's ready for tomorrow, Miller. I've already transferred $2 million to the ghost account. The digital forgery of Sarah's signature is perfect. When the fraud is discovered, she'll seem like the guilty one, Richard said on the recording, his jubilant tone evidencing the pleasure he felt in his own scheme. And the boy? Won't he cause problems? Asked the unknown voice on the other end of the line, clearly concerned about Ethan's presence as a possible obstacle. Richard's response burned like acid in Sarah's ears, each word exponentially increasing her determination to destroy him. Don't worry about the brat. After our talks, he's too terrified to speak. I threatened him with the possibility of his mother going to prison and him to an orphanage. Children are so easy to manipulate. It was enough to show some falsified documents, and he believed everything. Pathetic, really. The laughter that followed those words contained such pure cruelty that Sarah removed her headphones for a moment, unable to continue listening as she regained control of her emotions. It wasn't just indignation she felt, it was a visceral fury, a hatred so intense that its primitive strength surprised her. She took several deep breaths, reminding herself that she needed to remain calm to execute the next step with precision. Vengeance would not be impulsive. It would be calculated, public, devastating. Just as he had planned to meticulously destroy her, she would unmask him with the same attention to detail, but with an additional component he could never comprehend: the ferocity of a mother protecting her son. You chose the wrong victim, Richard. You should have researched better before trying to destroy someone who built an empire from scratch, she muttered to herself as she copied the audio file to a portable device, checked its quality, and prepared for the confrontation that would change everything. Nobody threatens my son and gets away with it. Absolutely nobody, she promised her reflection in the dark monitor, her eyes gleaming with glacial determination. The next morning, Sarah dressed with special care, choosing her most imposing outfit, the one she wore for particularly difficult negotiations, decisive board meetings, moments when she needed to emanate unwavering power and confidence. Each piece of clothing was armor, each carefully selected accessory a weapon in her arsenal. Ethan watched the transformation with silent admiration. He saw the formidable executive he had always admired resurface before his eyes, but also a determined warrior set on protecting what was hers. Before leaving, Sarah embraced her son at length, promising that by the end of that day, they would be free from the shadow that loomed over their lives. She drove to the company with a calm that surprised herself, each red traffic light an opportunity to mentally review the details of her plan. She knew Richard would be in the main conference room at 10 o'clock, presenting his new European project to the board and major investors. A perfect audience for the spectacle she had planned. She parked, greeted employees on the way with her usual cordiality, kept every aspect of her routine precisely as on any other day. No one observing her could suspect the storm she was preparing to unleash. She checked the device in her bag one more time, ensuring the audio file was ready for playback, that the connection to the room's sound system would work perfectly. With a calm yet authoritative voice that immediately commanded the attention of everyone present, Sarah strode into the conference room at precisely 10:15, ample time for Richard to be fully immersed in his fraudulent presentation. "Gentlemen, forgive the interruption, but there is an urgent matter that needs to be addressed before this presentation continues," she announced upon entering. "Sarah, darling, we're in the middle of an important presentation." "Can we discuss this later?" Richard responded, his tense smile barely masking his irritation at the unexpected disruption. The conference room was the strategic heart of the company, spacious, elegantly decorated, equipped with state-of-the-art audio-visual technology. The faces around the oval table reflected surprise at the unscheduled interruption, curiosity at Sarah's unusual tone, anticipation of what was to come. Richard remained standing by the projection screen, elaborate graphics displaying fictitious financial projections behind him, his initially confident posture now slightly destabilized by Sarah's unexpected presence. She calmly walked to the center of the room, each step measured, every movement deliberate, maintaining eye contact with each person present: directors, investors, people whose trust she had earned over years of dedicated and honest work. When she finally positioned herself directly opposite Richard, with the conference table between them like a symbolic battlefield, her expression transformed. The mask of professional civility fell away, revealing the seething fury that had been simmering beneath the surface since she heard the recording. The attendees instinctively straightened in their chairs, sensing the atmospheric shift in the room, realizing they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Traitor, how could you? This is outrageous!" Sarah exclaimed, her voice amplified by the room's perfect acoustics, the raw emotion in every syllable contrasting dramatically with her usual composure. "Sarah, my dear, this is highly improper." "We're in a business meeting," Richard responded, attempting to maintain control of the situation with a forced smile for those present, clearly uncomfortable with the unexpected direction the events had taken. The executives and investors around the table remained stunned into silence, alternating looks between Sarah, whose posture radiated a controlled fury they had never witnessed in her, and Richard, whose charismatic facade was visibly beginning to crack under unexpected pressure. No one dared intervene, instinctively grasping the gravity of the moment. Sarah advanced a few steps towards Richard, each movement laden with purpose and determination. The distance between them was shrinking not only physically, but also symbolically, the space for lies, manipulations, and deceptions narrowing with every passing second. Her eyes, normally warm in business meetings, even during the toughest negotiations, now emanated an icy chill, directed solely at the man who had betrayed her trust on both professional and personal levels. Those who had worked with Sarah for years had never seen her like this. The ever-rational and controlled businesswoman transformed into a force of nature by the lethal combination of wounded maternal instinct and attacked professional pride. Silence. I know everything, Richard, everything. How you planned to rob me, how you psychologically threatened my son, she continued, her voice thundering through the room as she opened her purse and retrieved the small audio device. Gentlemen, I ask merely a few minutes of your attention. I believe everyone here deserves to know who they're truly doing business with. Sarah, you're being ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about, Richard tried again, his gaze now darting nervously between her and the door, calculating distances, assessing possibilities for escape or damage control. With precise movements that betrayed years of familiarity with the room's audio-visual system, Sarah connected the device to the sound equipment. Tense seconds of silence followed as everyone waited, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Then Richard's voice filled the room. Not the polished professional tone he used in meetings, but his true voice, laced with contempt and arrogance, openly discussing financial fraud, forged documents, psychological threats against a 12-year-old boy. Each incriminating word echoed amplified, impossible to ignore or deny. The expressions around the table transformed from initial shock to outrage, then to revulsion as they grasped the extent of the betrayal. Richard visibly paled, his normally confident face now a mask of mounting panic, as he realized there was no possible explanation, no easy way out of this perfectly executed trap. The recording played on relentlessly, exposing every sordid detail of his scheme, every moment of calculated cruelty, every evidence of his true nature that he had worked so hard to conceal beneath charm and sophistication. When finally his own voice explicitly threatening Ethan was played, murmurs of indignation rippled through the room. Even in the sometimes ruthless world of business, threatening a child was a line no one there considered acceptable to cross. You terrorized what I hold most precious, my son, threatened to tear us apart. That will never be forgiven, Sarah declared when the recording ended, her voice now low but charged with an intensity that made each word weigh like lead in the tense air of the room. This is a setup, a sham to incriminate me. Sarah was unhinged, making up stories because she found out about my affair with another woman, Richard shouted desperately, abandoning any pretense of composure, resorting to the last tactic available, attempting to discredit the incontestable evidence and Sarah's sanity. The next move happened with a swiftness that took everyone by surprise. Richard, realizing he had completely lost control of the situation, that his reputation, scheme, and freedom were irreparably compromised, decided on the only option left to him: flight. With an abrupt motion, he knocked over the projection screen and tried to run for the door. His escape route, however, passed too close to Sarah, a fatal miscalculation. Years of practice in various sports had given her reflexes and strength that many underestimated due to her elegant appearance. In a fluid motion, she grabbed Richard's arm as he tried to pass her, her grip surprisingly firm for hands that normally held only luxury pens and champagne flutes at corporate events. The momentum of his interrupted run caused him to lose his balance, allowing her to momentarily immobilize him against the conference room wall, their faces now inches apart, he with fear etched into every feature, she with the fierce determination of someone who has finally cornered her predator. Nobody traumatizes my son and steals what I built with so much sacrifice. Nobody, Sarah hissed, her words audible only to Richard, but the intensity of her expression clearly communicating the gravity of her implicit promise to the others present. So you don't understand, Sarah. I have connections. Powerful people owe me favors. I can make your life hell even from afar. Richard threatened, in a last, desperate attempt at intimidation, his trembling voice betraying the panic he felt. Sarah's response did not come in words, but in action. Without releasing Richard's arm, she pressed the discreet emergency button installed under the conference table with her free hand. Immediately, the doors opened, and 2 burly security guards entered the room with decisive strides. This man tried to defraud my company and psychologically tortured my son with terrible threats. It's all recorded. Take him away and call the police, Sarah ordered, her voice regaining the characteristic authority of the CEO everyone respected. The efficient and discreet security guards grabbed Richard by the arms. As they dragged him out of the room, he still tried to maintain some dignity, but the desperation in his eyes betrayed his growing panic. You'll regret this, Sarah. I have powerful friends, he shouted as he was led down the hallway, his voice echoing pathetically in the stunned silence that dominated the surroundings. At that moment, something fell from Richard's pocket during the commotion. His cell phone slid across the polished floor until it stopped at Sarah's feet. She instinctively picked it up, and before she could decide what to do with the device, the screen lit up with a newly arrived message. The text was clear and alarming. Boss, serious problem. The judge didn't accept the false accusation against Sarah. We need Plan B. Is the boy still our target to pressure the mother? The shock of the revelation in Richard's cell phone message hit Sarah like a bolt of lightning. Her blood ran cold in her veins as the words Plan B and the boy is still our target echoed in her mind. The scene in the conference room hadn't ended. Executives were conversing in agitated tones. The company's security system had been activated, and the police were on their way. But none of that mattered now. In seconds, Sarah transformed from a vengeful executive into a desperate mother, adrenaline flooding her body with a single priority: Ethan. Without any explanations to those present, she ran to the elevator, repeatedly pressing the button while each second seemed like an eternity. The metal device moved with excruciating slowness between floors, oblivious to the urgency consuming her. Inside the cabin, she checked the message again, looking for clues, trying to decipher how much time she had, who could be involved, how imminent the danger would be. The doors finally opened in the parking lot, and Sarah ran to her car, keys already in hand. Ignoring the surprised looks from employees who had never seen the always composed CEO in such an evident state of despair. The engine roared to life, and she accelerated out of the corporate parking lot, ignoring speed limits, focused solely on getting home before the Plan B could be put into action. Please, let him be okay. Please, let me get there in time, she repeated like a mantra, as she drove dangerously between cars, the phone on speakerphone unsuccessfully trying to connect to Ethan's number. He's not answering. Why isn't he answering? He should be home safe with the babysitter, she mumbled to herself, panic growing with each unanswered ring on the line. The city blurred past the car windows as Sarah cut through side streets, avoiding traffic on the main avenues. Every red light was torture, every slow crawl in traffic a cruel test for her already frayed nerves. In one of those forced pauses, she tried calling again, this time her mother. To her surprise and immense relief, Mrs. Dorothy answered on the second ring. The connection was unstable, but the words she managed to discern through the line's noise were like balm for her panicked heart. We're okay. I picked up Ethan from school. Heading home now. The coincidence, or was it maternal intuition, of her mother deciding to pick up her grandson on that critical day seemed almost providential. When the light finally turned green, Sarah accelerated with renewed urgency. No longer desperate but determined to get home before them, to ensure the environment was safe, to make certain none of Richard's accomplices could be lying in wait. The streets of the residential neighborhood where she lived had never seemed so long. Every familiar curve now fraught with apprehension, every shadow in the trees a potential danger. They're safe for now. My mother is with him. I always knew she would be our salvation, Sarah thought, feeling her trembling hands on the steering wheel finally stabilize a little. But where would Richard's accomplices go when they learned of his arrest? Straight after Ethan, as the message threatened. The concern returned in full force as she hurriedly parked in the mansion's driveway. Sarah leapt from the car and ran to the front door, frantically entering the security code. Once inside, she swiftly yet meticulously swept through every room of the house, checking windows, locks, any sign of intrusion or strange presence. Satisfied that the house was secure, she reinforced the alarm system and positioned herself by the living room window, observing the street with paranoid attention, expecting her mother's car to appear at any moment. The wait, however brief, allowed her professional mind to start working. They needed a contingency plan. They needed to ensure Ethan's safety. They needed to neutralize any remaining threat now that Richard was in custody. As she mentally organized the next steps, Mrs. Dorothy's familiar silver sedan finally rounded the corner, moving with the matriarch's characteristic prudence. Sarah ran to the door, opening it before the car had even completely parked, her heart racing as she spotted Ethan in the passenger seat, safe, unharmed, oblivious to the danger that had surrounded him. When the boy got out of the vehicle, she couldn't contain herself. She ran to him and enveloped him in an embrace so tight that it surprised him, tears of relief silently streaming down her face as she mentally thanked all the forces of the universe for arriving in time, for her mother following that protective impulse, for her son being safe in her arms. "Son, thank God you're all right," Sarah exclaimed, resisting the urge to physically check if he was unharmed, knowing that would only unnecessarily frighten him. "Mom, what happened? You're trembling." "Grandma picked me up from school without warning. Said it was a surprise," Ethan responded, confused by his mother's exaggerated reaction to what seemed like just an ordinary day. Once inside the reinforced safety of the house, with all the doors locked and the alarm system activated to its maximum level, the three gathered in the living room. The expression on Sarah's face as she tried to organize her thoughts raised alarm bells for Mrs. Dorothy, who remained silent, giving her daughter the space needed to explain the situation in her own words. Ethan sat on the couch, alternating glances between his mother and grandmother, gradually realizing that something significant had occurred. The momentary silence weighed heavily in the room, charged with unspoken words, pending revelations, a fundamental change in family life that still needed to be articulated. Sarah took a deep breath, mentally organizing how to explain to a 12-year-old boy that the man who had terrorized him was not only in jail, but had accomplices who could pose a danger. How to convey the seriousness of the situation without further traumatizing him. How to balance truth and protection. Deciding on measured honesty, the same that had always guided her relationship with her son, she sat beside him, taking his small but already masculine-traced hands in hers. "What happened? Why are you acting so strange?" asked Grandma Dorothy, her maternal intuition catching the extraordinary tension, even for the already complicated situation she knew. "Richard has been arrested, but it seems he had more plans. Involving Ethan," Sarah replied, showing the message on her cell phone to her mother while trying to protect her son from seeing the threatening text. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was broken by the most unexpected and necessary sound, a sob coming from Ethan. The boy who had spent weeks containing emotions, pretending normalcy, carrying alone the weight of terrible threats, finally found the release he so desperately needed. The tears came first, silent, running down his still childish cheeks. Then the sobs grew in intensity, his small body trembling with the force of repressed emotions now released, like a suddenly bursting dam. Sarah and Grandma Dorothy exchanged glances, not of concern, but of profound understanding. That crying was not a cause for alarm, but the necessary beginning of healing. It was the first honest expression of mixed fear and relief that the boy had allowed himself since the beginning of the nightmare. Sarah enveloped him in her arms, allowing the tears to dampen her expensive silk blouse, gently rocking him as she had when he was smaller, murmuring comforting words in his ear. "Mrs." Dorothy remained close, a reassuring hand on her grandson's back, the other holding Sarah, forming a familiar circle of protection around the child. When the crying finally subsided into occasional sobs, Ethan pulled away slightly, wiping his face with the backs of his hands in a typically childlike gesture that contrasted with the two adult words that came out of his mouth. "He threatened me every night, Mom. He showed fake documents and said that if I told, you would go to prison and they would send me to an orphanage. He said we would never see each other again." Ethan finally confessed, the words rushing out as if he feared losing his courage if he hesitated. "Oh, my little hero, you endured all that alone to protect me?" Sarah responded, her heart breaking with the weight her son had silently carried because of her. The following hours were dedicated to ensuring immediate safety and planning the next steps. Calls were made to the police, reporting the threatening message, to the family's lawyer detailing the legal situation, to the company's security team, reinforcing protection for all those involved. Ethan, exhausted by the emotional outpouring, fell asleep on the couch while the adults conversed in low tones, planning every detail to ensure that no remaining threat could reach them. The news of Richard's escape came like a bucket of cold water. During the transfer to the police station, he had managed to escape, pushing a security guard and fleeing through the emergency exit. The news intensified protective measures. The house was equipped with additional security. Ethan was temporarily removed from school. A discreet protection team was hired to monitor the family 24 hours a day. The following days passed in a state of constant alert, each unexpected sound causing a start, each unknown car on the street investigated, each stranger in the vicinity eyed with suspicion. In parallel, Sarah worked tirelessly to dismantle the fraud network Richard had begun to implement in her company, reversing transfers, explaining the situation to investors, ensuring that every diverted penny was tracked and recovered. It was a period of physical and emotional exhaustion, of simultaneous business and family reconstruction, of healing visible and invisible wounds. But it was also a time of rediscovery, of the inner strength they had always possessed, of the family bonds that no external threat could break, of the resilience that defined that lineage of strong women and the boy who carried that legacy. "Sarah, you can't keep going like this, working 20 hours a day, jumping at the slightest noise, checking the locks 10 times before sleeping," Donna Dorothy observed one night, concerned about her daughter's evident exhaustion. "I can't let my guard down, Mum. Not while he's still on the run, not while there's any chance he'll try to take revenge through Ethan," Sarah replied, massaging her temples to relieve the constant headache that had been accompanying her for days. Richard's capture some time later brought the first genuine relief. Detained while trying to cross the border with fake documents, he was placed in strict custody with no right to bail. Investigations revealed his pattern. It wasn't the first time he had used relationships to carry out financial scams, leaving several victims in his wake. For Sarah, each discovery confirmed how blind she had been, fitting perfectly into the profile he was seeking. A successful businesswoman, emotionally vulnerable, with a son who would serve as leverage. The experience was revolting yet educational. She would never again be deceived by superficial charm. The accomplices mentioned in the message were also arrested, completely eliminating the threat. Gradually, life regained its rhythm. Ethan returned to school, initially with security. Sarah reduced her work hours, and Grandma Dorothy remained the fundamental pillar in the family's emotional rebuilding. "The worst part wasn't the threats, Mom. It was seeing you so happy with someone who only wanted to hurt us," Ethan confided one night during dinner, months after the traumatic events. "You know what saddens me most, son? That for a while you felt alone, felt like you couldn't trust me." "I promise that will never happen again," Sarah responded, holding her son's hand across the table, a silent pact forming between them. 3 months after Richard's arrest, the family decided to take a genuine break. With the company stabilized and the legal proceedings underway, Sarah booked an isolated beachfront home, far from stressful memories. The place offered white sands, blue ocean, and necessary comfort without ostentation, perfect for their recalibrated happiness. The first few days required adaptation, learning to relax, not startling at sounds, sleeping without obsessively checking locks. Ethan, with the typical resilience of children, soon rediscovered simple joys, building sandcastles and running freely. Sarah observed these transformations while reducing her workload to healthy limits. Grandma Dorothy, initially reluctant, eventually yielded to her grandson's pleas, bringing normalcy and wisdom to the seaside refuge where they all sought emotional reconstitution. "Mommy, I'm glad he's gone," Ethan said one afternoon, putting the finishing touches on an elaborately constructed sandcastle, his voice casual as if commenting on the weather, but the content revealing the depth of the ongoing healing. "Me too, my love. I promise I'll never let anyone tear us apart again," Sarah replied, abandoning her book to join her son in the sand, noticing with satisfaction how his shoulders no longer carried the constant tension of the previous months. The recovery did not follow a straight line. There were occasional nightmares, moments of regression, days when the memories seemed more vivid. But each setback was followed by greater strides. Each difficult conversation strengthened the family bonds. Each day at the beach pushed the shadows of the past a little further away. Sarah also took this time for professional reflection. The events with Richard had exposed vulnerabilities not only personal, but also structural in her company. While Ethan played in the sand and Mrs. Dorothy prepared the flavorful meals that had always been her particular way of showing love. Sarah mentally restructured financial security protocols, verification systems, mechanisms that would prevent any similar attempt in the future. It wasn't just residual paranoia, it was growth, learning extracted from pain, strength derived from adversity. When they finally returned to the city, the company would not only recover from the blow attempted by Richard, but would emerge stronger, more secure, more resilient. Like her family, like her son, like herself. The scars would remain. There was no way to completely erase the trauma experienced, but they would transform into reminders of resilience, not victimhood. "Is the company recovered from the blow?" asked Mrs. Dorothy one night during dinner on the beach house veranda, the sounds of the waves providing the perfect soundtrack for the family conversation. "Completely, Mom. In fact, we're stronger than ever. The investors were impressed by my determination to protect the company and my family. The transparency with which I dealt with the entire situation ultimately generated more confidence, not less," replied Sarah, feeling legitimate pride for the first time in months. The final afternoon on the beach had a bittersweet taste, the end of a much-needed break, the imminent return to real life with its challenges and complexities. But this time they would return different, stronger individually, more united as a family, wiser to the dangers of the world, more appreciative of the safety they found in each other. Seated on the sand, watching the sun begin its majestic descent toward the horizon, the three formed a picture of successful reconstruction. Ethan, tanned and visibly more relaxed, was finalizing his last sandcastle of the season, an impressive structure that demonstrated both his creativity and his newly recovered ability to focus on pleasurable activities without the constant weight of fear. Sarah, who had finally managed to abandon her laptop for a full day, watched her son with that characteristic look of maternal love, no longer clouded by the guilt she had initially carried for not realizing his suffering in time. Mrs. Dorothy completed the trio, her presence an anchor of stability, her wisdom a compass that had helped navigate the turbulent waters of the past few months. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky with spectacular shades of orange and pink, they embraced spontaneously, a perfect circle of love and protection, a human fortress safer than any sandcastle, more resilient than any corporate structure, more valuable than any financial empire. "I think we're ready to go back," Sarah said, feeling the truth of those words deep within her, the anxiety that once accompanied thoughts of returning to the city now replaced by serene determination. "Yes, we are. Together we can face anything," Ethan replied, his youthful voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years, his eyes reflecting the sunset and a newfound confidence no threat could permanently extinguish. As they prepared to witness the last moments of the sunset, Sarah's phone vibrated in her pocket. She reluctantly checked the message, briefly breaking the magical moment. Her body momentarily stiffened, a flash of old tension crossing her face. Ethan and Mrs. Dorothy immediately noticed the change, years of hypervigilance creating a heightened sensitivity to subtle shifts in each other's behavior. Before they could ask, however, Sarah turned to them, her expression already softened, conveying both alertness and control of the situation. The message was from her lawyer. During the transfer to the maximum security prison, Richard had attempted to escape again. Amidst the confusion, he had pushed one of the guards and ran towards the emergency exit. causing moments of chaos and despair among those present. Sarah looked at her son and mother, instantly deciding to share the information. There were no more secrets in that family, no more truths hidden under the guise of protection. The three deserved to know both the dangers and the victories, to face together each new piece of information, each development in the saga that had involuntarily become part of their lives. "Don't let him escape." The other prosecutor in the case had cried out desperately upon seeing Richard trying to flee. As detailed in the message Sarah was now sharing with her family, gathered in the protective circle they had created. "And were they able to stop him?" Ethan asked, his voice firm despite the evident tension in his young eyes, demonstrating the strength he had developed through adversity. 2 days after his escape, Richard walked nervously through the bus station, calculating each step to go unnoticed. He wore an untrimmed beard, a cap pulled down low, and dark sunglasses as a disguise. He carried only a battered backpack with fake documents, money, and basic clothes. The last 48 hours had been pure paranoia, sleeping in a cheap hotel, avoiding cameras, startling at every siren. His face was plastered across all the news broadcasts as one of the most wanted criminals. The scam that was supposed to secure his luxurious retirement had turned him into a desperate fugitive. The bus to the border would depart in 20 minutes, enough time to buy a cash ticket and board without raising suspicions. Richard scanned the environment, looking for signs of police officers, while mentally rehearsing the behavior of a simple traveler. "Just a few more minutes and I'll be on the bus. Tomorrow I'll cross the border and start over," he thought, adjusting the strap of his backpack as he headed towards the ticket counter. As always, running away from your responsibilities, preparing to destroy other innocent lives, he muttered bitterly to himself, the voice of conscience he usually ignored briefly manifesting before being silenced. With his safe passage tucked in his pocket, Richard made his way to the boarding platform, skillfully blending in among the diverse travelers awaiting their transportation. The habit of assessing people, an essential skill for identifying potential victims in his criminal career, now served the opposite purpose, detecting possible threats, identifying suspicious glances, recognizing the characteristic pattern of undercover police officers. He sat on a strategically positioned bench, from where he could observe both the entrance to the platform and the bus that would soon take him away from there. With only 10 minutes left before boarding, his gaze caught a familiar movement. A middle-aged man, formally dressed and with a rigidly upright posture, strode purposefully in his direction. There was something disturbingly familiar about that figure, something that made Richard's stomach knot with apprehension. As the man approached close enough for their eyes to meet, Richard's blood ran cold. That face belonged to the past, one of the many he had ruined and discarded without remorse in his trail of financial and emotional destruction. A face he never expected to see again, let alone at that critical moment, let alone in that specific place. "Richard Matthews. Trying to escape like the coward you've always been," the man pronounced loudly enough to attract curious glances, his tone carrying years of crystallized resentment. "Blackwell, get out of my way." Richard hissed furiously and desperately, rising quickly, calculating escape routes as his heart raced at an alarming pace. Jonathan Blackwell remained impassive in the face of Richard's evident agitation. 5 years had passed since he lost everything: his family's 3-generation business, his home, his reputation, even temporarily his family, at the hands of that charismatic conman who now trembled slightly before him. 5 years of rebuilding from scratch, swallowing humiliations, enduring sleepless nights and days of grueling work to recover what he had lost. The news of Richard's arrest and subsequent escape did not surprise him. Leopards don't change their spots, con artists don't abandon their scams. When a former police colleague contacted him, mentioning that the fugitive would likely try to escape through the bus station, Jonathan recognized the opportunity fate was offering him, not for personal revenge, but for collective justice. Not for individual satisfaction, but to protect future victims. He stood firm, partially blocking Richard's path, his expression a calculated mixture of determination and disdain. He observed the growing panic in the conman's eyes, the sweat beginning to form on his forehead, the frantic glances in search of an exit. It was like watching a predator turned prey, a poetic reversal of the roles they both played in the past. "Not this time. You destroyed my family, threatened an innocent boy. This ends today," Jonathan declared, his voice strangely calm, almost compassionate, like someone ending a painful chapter that had dragged on for too long. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're confusing me with someone else." Richard tried in a last and pathetic effort, his voice betraying the desperation he felt as he realized his plan was rapidly crumbling. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible to casual observers. Jonathan discreetly took his hand to his pocket and pulled out a small metal object, not a weapon, as Richard initially feared, but a simple police whistle. The piercing and characteristic sound tore through the bustling air of the bus station, seemingly innocuous to those who didn't know its meaning. For Richard, however, that sound represented the end of his freedom, the collapse of his plans, the forced termination of his criminal career. As if in a perfectly rehearsed choreography, police officers emerged from various points in the bus station, some emerging from shops where they had pretended to be customers, others abandoning their positions as taxi drivers, some simply revealing themselves among the crowd of ordinary travelers. In seconds, Richard found himself surrounded by law enforcement officers, some uniformed, others in plain clothes, all with guns pointed at him, all with firm expressions that left no room for negotiation or escape. Simultaneously, flashes began to go off, strategically positioned journalists capturing the exact moment of the recapture of the fugitive who had dominated the headlines in recent days. Public humiliation now joined the complete defeat of his plans. His disheveled and desperate image crystallized for posterity in the visual records of that decisive moment. "It's over, Richard. Your victims can sleep peacefully tonight," said Jonathan as he watched the police handcuff the conman, a complex feeling of closure gradually replacing the resentment he had carried for years. "You don't understand, Blackwell. I could have given you everything back. We could have made a deal." Richard tried to negotiate, his cunning mind working frantically, even in those last moments of freedom. A month passed, transforming urgent news into faded memories, sensationalist headlines into small footnotes. For the general public, Richard's case gradually lost relevance, replaced by new controversies, new scandals, new dramas. For him, however, each day represented a new lesson in forced humility, a continuous exercise in losing control over his own life. The trial had been surprisingly swift, facilitated by the abundance of evidence, Sarah's detailed testimony, the incriminating recording, and the forged documents found in his hideout. The sentence combined prison with community service, an innovative decision by the judge who believed in rehabilitation through direct reparation to society. Thus, on that sunny spring morning, Richard found himself in a situation he had never imagined for himself, wearing the characteristic orange uniform of prisoners, wielding a paint roller, renovating the peeling walls of an elementary school on the outskirts of the city. The sun punished his skin, unaccustomed to outdoor work. The smell of paint caused slight dizziness. The curious and sometimes fearful glances of the children in the adjacent courtyard constantly reminded him of his new social position, no longer the elegant predator, but the contained threat, the negative example, the personified cautionary tale. Two guards watched his every move closely, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of trouble, their expressions alternating between professional boredom and careful vigilance. "Please, can I do something else? I can't stand children." Richard complained after hours of work under the relentless sun, his hands unaccustomed to manual labor, already showing painful blisters. "Ironic, considering you had no problems psychologically threatening a 12-year-old boy," one of the guards replied dryly, his gaze clearly communicating the contempt he felt for the prisoner. Richard's complaint, like all previous ones, fell on indifferent ears. The penitentiary system, with its rigid rules and relentless bureaucracy, proved completely oblivious to the preferences or discomforts of its involuntary residents. As he tried to find a less painful position to hold the paint roller, he saw an approaching figure he immediately recognized, the prison warden, with his impeccable suit and military posture, inspecting the ongoing community work. He was a man of few words and inflexible principles, known for firmly believing in the rehabilitative potential of honest work and social contribution. His scrutinizing eyes critically examined the partially painted wall, noting the imperfections, the drips, the marks of inexperience evident in Richard's work. He showed no surprise. He expected little from hands accustomed only to counting fraudulent money and signing forged documents. With precise gestures, he adjusted his wristwatch and consulted the clipboard he carried, verifying data, confirming schedules, ensuring that every minute of the sentence would be duly served. Mr. Matthews, your sentence includes 2,000 hours of community service in children's institutions. This is just your first day. The children's library, the pediatric hospital, and the state orphanage are still to come, the warden informed in a monotonous tone, as if simply checking items on a shopping list. This is inhumane. I have administrative and financial skills. I could be much more useful in an office, Richard protested, unable to contain the indignation he felt at the prospect of months painting walls, organizing children's books, cleaning hospital toys. The contrast could not be more pronounced. While Richard grappled with his sentence across town, Sarah prepared for a special visit with Ethan. In the months following Richard's definitive imprisonment, they had both worked intensely on their emotional recovery, therapy sessions, honest conversations, the gradual rebuilding of mutual trust and family security. The company had not only survived the crisis, but thrived under Sarah's reinvigorated leadership, as she implemented new security protocols inspired by her own traumatic experience. More significantly, she had started a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of financial fraud and psychological abuse, transforming her pain into purpose, her negative experience into concrete aid for others. Part of this initiative included a rehabilitation program for criminals through community service, the same program that now, ironically, kept Richard painting school walls. The visit planned for that afternoon represented an important step in the healing process. Ethan would meet the project his mother sponsored, see how painful stories could transform into promising new beginnings, understand that even the most traumatic experiences could bear positive fruit when properly channeled. What neither of them could have imagined was the unexpected encounter that fate, or perhaps poetic justice, had orchestrated for that specific afternoon. This project means a lot to me, son. It shows we can turn our worst experiences into something that benefits the community, Sarah explained as she parked the car near the newly renovated school. I'm proud of you, Mum. You turned something horrible into something good for everyone, Ethan responded, his voice carrying a surprising maturity for someone so young. The elementary school displayed a remarkable transformation compared to the before photographs Sarah had shown Ethan. What was once a neglected building with peeling walls and a disheartening appearance now exhibited vibrant colors, artistic murals, a visibly more inviting environment for childhood learning. As they walked through the courtyard, receiving smiles and greetings from teachers who recognized the patron of the renovation project, Sarah proudly explained how every invested penny returned multiplied in the form of healthier educational environments, elevated self-esteem for students and teachers, and improved academic results. The school principal joined them, leading them on a guided tour of the renovated classrooms, new equipment, and modernized cafeteria. The last stop would be the exterior facade, where painting works were still underway, a perfect demonstration of the project in progress, a concrete example of the ongoing transformation. None of the three could foresee the encounter that awaited them as they rounded the corner of the main building. "Mom, isn't that—" Ethan suddenly whispered, his voice faltering slightly as he pointed to a figure in an orange uniform, mechanically working with a paint roller. "Yes, son. He's paying for his crimes by helping children, as he should," Sarah responded after a moment of initial shock, her voice finding surprising balance in the face of the unexpected sight. The encounter, completely unplanned, absolutely fortuitous, momentarily froze the four adults present. The school principal, sensing the sudden tension in the air, discreetly stepped back a few paces, offering privacy for a moment that clearly transcended the administrative formalities of the visit. The guards, recognizing Sarah from the news and the trial, remained alert but did not intervene. When Richard noticed the presence of those whose lives he had tried to destroy, he initially froze in his movement, the paint roller suspended in the air like in a paused scene. His face, once tanned and impeccably cared for, now displayed an institutional pallor and forced neglect. His eyes, once confident and seductive, now revealed a complex mix of emotions: shame, restrained anger, surprise, perhaps a fleeting glimpse of remorse. For an almost eternal moment no one spoke, the silence laden with the weight of everything that had happened, of everything that could have been, of everything that would never be. The unexpected encounter created a closure that no court could provide. The victim and the perpetrator face to face, no longer in positions of vulnerability and power, but in a new arrangement where justice had redistributed the roles. Richard lowered his gaze, unable to sustain eye contact, especially with Ethan, whose youthful eyes carried a disconcerting mixture of residual fear and cautious curiosity. "Sorry, Uncle," a childish voice suddenly exclaimed, shattering the tense silence like shattered crystal. A little boy, no more than 6 years old, had carelessly run too close to Richard, bumping into the paint bucket and spilling some of its contents over the prisoner's institutional shoes. The child's face showed genuine alarm at the accident, his wide eyes awaiting the unknown adult's reaction in fearful expectation. For a fleeting instant, Richard's usual anger flared in his eyes, the same pent-up fury he had so often directed at Ethan during his whispered threats. Then, something unexpected happened. His gaze quickly moved between the frightened child in front of him, Ethan watching attentively from a distance, and Sarah waiting with a neutral but vigilant expression. Something changed in his demeanor, imperceptible to casual observers, but clearly visible to Sarah, trained by months of hypervigilance to detect every nuance of his expressions. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It wasn't a moment of instant enlightenment. It was just a small adjustment, a brief moment of self-awareness, perhaps the first genuine seed of something that, with time and proper nourishment, could eventually transform itself into redemption. "It's okay, little one. Accidents happen," Richard responded in a controlled voice, surprising himself with the absence of hostility that would normally accompany such a situation. "That was the first sincere response I've ever heard from him," Sarah commented softly, only for Ethan to hear, realizing the subtle significance of that seemingly trivial moment. The encounter didn't extend beyond those brief moments. There were no great speeches to be delivered, no dramatic forgivenesses to be offered, no cathartic confrontations to be staged. Justice had already done its work. Time had already begun its gradual process of healing. Life had already moved on to new paths for all involved. With a slight nod to the guards, a gesture of professional acknowledgement, not personal connection, Sarah gently placed her arm around Ethan's shoulders, guiding him gently back to the car. The boy cast one last look back, not at Richard specifically, but at the entire scene they were leaving. The renovated school, the work in progress, the contrast between destruction and reconstruction that somehow perfectly symbolized his own recent journey. As they walked side by side, their steps synchronized in natural harmony, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Not the absence of challenges or the guarantee that nothing else would hurt them, but the deep certainty that, together, they could face any future storm. "Come on, son. Our life is too precious to waste with resentment. Justice was served in its own way," Sarah said, as she intertwined her fingers with his, the simple contact carrying silent promises of protection, continuity, unconditional love. "We move forward, don't we? Stronger because of what we went through, not in spite of it," Ethan responded, articulating with surprising clarity a truth that many adults never fully understand. Sarah and Ethan walked away hand in hand, leaving behind not only the man who had briefly impacted their lives, but also the weight of resentment and the shadow of trauma. Their silhouettes stood out against the afternoon sun, no longer vulnerable figures, but a fortified unit, a family reforged in adversity. Behind them, Richard continued applying paint to worn walls, inadvertently participating in a process that mirrored a universal truth. Even the greatest destructions can give way to rebuilding, transforming deep damages into foundations stronger than before. If Sarah and Ethan's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and check out the story that's appearing on the screen now, specially chosen for you. See you soon.